Welcome back, folks, to the 2016 Bridgewater's Finest Movie Awards. And here we go. We're getting into the I can't believe I loved this movie, I can't believe I hated this movie, I expected more from these movies, and I expected less from these movies. Let's get started. We're going to kick off on a positive note with I can't believe I loved this movie. Now, as I mentioned before, this award goes to a movie that I went in probably even expecting to like, and in the case of the movie that won, it was a movie that I was expecting to like. It had the elements that I figured I would like, but I certainly didn't expect to fall in love with it the way that I did. In 2016, my award for I can't believe I loved this movie goes to Demolition, a drama film starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Naomi Watts, and Chris Cooper, and directed by Jean-Marc Vallée. In Demolition, a successful investment banker played by Jake Gyllenhaal is struggling to cope with life after the death of his wife in a car accident. With the help of a telephone customer service rep as well as her young son, Gyllenhaal's character begins to rebuild his life, beginning by destroying the life that he once knew. Again, as I mentioned, this is a movie that I expected to like. Anytime I see Jake Gyllenhaal on a bill, I want to see the movie, no matter really what the movie is. And Jean-Marc Vallée, he's a well-known, very underrated director. He killed it a few years ago with Dallas Buyers Club. That was one of my favorite movies of 2013. He's a guy that deserves more work, should be working more than he is. So I see Jean-Marc Vallée plus Jake Gyllenhaal, I'm in. What really made me love this movie is the character arc of Gyllenhaal's character. He goes from this composed, maintained, my life is plotted out for me kind of successful person, and due to these events that are, not his own, he's sort of forced to decompile that and break it down and ultimately get rid of it if he's ever to move on. And he sort of finds himself in a very sort of disestablished, almost kind of hedonism. He becomes this person that's just like, I feel like doing this, so I'm going to do it. And sometimes you can have a movie like that, and with a character like that, it becomes unbelievable because there's no repercussions for the things that he does. There are repercussions in this, and it shows a steady directorial hand, a steady screenwriting hand, and just his particular character arc. He's the main event of that movie. That's what I was tuning in for, and that's what I ended up really loving about it. Throw on top of that the rest of the cast, which is incredibly talented. Chris Cooper, you put Chris Cooper in anything and he just sells it. He's just one of these senior actors, these older actors who are believable as just about anything that you put them in. Naomi Watts is also excellent, so the cast really insulates it. The cast really makes the material pop, and they really get the most out of the material. Demolition is my movie in 2016 that I can't believe I loved. In 2016, the movie that I can't believe I hated was The Fifth Wave, a young adult action sci-fi movie starring Chloe Grace Moretz, Ron Livingston, Liev Schreiber, and Alex Rowe, and directed by Jay Blakeson. After their arrival, 4 waves of increasingly deadly alien attacks have left most of the world decimated. Cassie, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, is on the run, desperately trying to protect her younger brother. This was one of the real disappointments of the year for me. This is based on actually a really talented writer's trilogy in young adult readers, teen readers. Rick Yancey is the writer of the Fifth Wave books, and they're actually really well written, and Rick Yancey's a talented writer, which is why this movie was so disappointing. Plus, there's been a lot of young adult films in the last 5 years or so, 10 years, that have been really good and have found a lot of box office success. And there are people in the industry that know how to do these movies right. It just seems like none of them were working on this one. Everything in this movie is sound and fury. Things happen. They're not given enough time to properly develop before more things happen. And there are so many elements of this movie and so many things that happen during the movie that are just left out there. Now, I understand this is a trilogy of books, so there's time still to develop a lot of these points, but there's a lot of them that are not going to be addressed, and they're not going to be developed in future books because they were just singular, ancillary things that should have been self-contained within the one movie. And The Fifth Wave doesn't do that. They introduce things and then they leave them. And that you're never going to readdress that. So as an audience member, you don't get any kind of closure. Also, one thing I absolutely hated about this movie is that virtually everything about it is superficial. Every relationship that you see develop in this movie by any character that is under the age of 25, you know it's superficial. You know the only reason that this relationship is developed is, pair the characters off because they're teenagers and that's what teenagers do. So there's no meaning behind any relationship, friendship, or otherwise that's developed in this movie because there's nothing to it. There's no meat behind it. For 2016, The Fifth Wave is the movie that I can't believe I hated. So we're going to move on now to the award for the 3 movies that I expected more from. So these are movies that I had expectations going into them, whether it was an expectation of quality or an expectation of certain things to happen or what have you. I had expectations going in, and my expectations just simply were not met. So once again, this is an award that I give to 3 movies, so we're going to start at the bottom with number 3. My number 3 movie that I expected more from in 2016 is Suicide Squad. It's an action comedy starring Will Smith, Margot Robbie, Jared Leto, and Viola Davis, and directed by David Ayer. In Suicide Squad, a secret government agency is recruiting imprisoned supervillains to execute dangerous black ops missions in exchange for their clemency. And this movie is the very definition of expectations versus reality. I had certain expectations going into this movie. I got some of them. I didn't get a lot of other ones. Now, that's not to say that the movie is any better or any worse because it didn't meet my expectations. It is just different, and this was a movie this year that got really unfairly crapped on. This and Batman vs. Superman, so basically just everything in the DC cinematic universe. That said, I understand where people's anger came from with this movie. People expect a lot from a movie with Batman characters in it, or Batman himself. See Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. People have expectations for those movies, and I think part of that is we're so spoiled with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is so good. There were a lot of missed opportunities in Suicide Squad, especially with the Harley Quinn character, the Joker character, and their relationship. I don't know what that's supposed to symbolize. But you gotta remember, this is part of a cinematic universe. There's so much time to correct these things, right the ship, change course. There's so much time to do this. All the same, I went into Suicide Squad expecting some things. Ultimately, I didn't get what I was expecting. Suicide Squad is my number 3 movie that I expected more from in 2016. My number 2 movie that I expected more from in 2016 is The Forest. It's a horror movie starring Natalie Dormer, Taylor Kinney, and Stephanie Voigt, and directed by Jason Zada. In The Forest, a young woman is searching for her twin sister, both of those characters obviously being played by Natalie Dormer. She's searching in the Japanese forest of Aokigahara, and yes, I did have to double check that just to get the pronunciation right. Aokigahara, otherwise known as the Japanese suicide forest. And inside this forest, she finds herself surrounded by supernatural forces. If there was a movie this year that I was really desperate to like, if I would describe myself as being desperate to like a specific movie, it was probably this one, especially with how early in the year it was. When I first heard about this movie, the concept of a horror movie being set in the Japanese suicide forest, I'm first in line. I'm ready for that. Sign me up for that. I'm in. That's one of those concepts, and I believe I've used this phrase a lot. That's one of those concepts you have to work a lot harder to screw that concept up than you do to do it right for me. And I felt like they were actively trying to screw up that concept. For a movie that is set in a suicide forest, it's not creepy. It's not really atmospheric at all, because there's a great atmosphere you can build in that kind of locale. It's not atmospheric at all. It's not creepy. It's dependent entirely on its jump scares, which really effective horror for me, you can use jump scares. It's something to employ, but it's not, don't make your whole movie dependent on it. This whole movie, to get any kind of sense of fear, was reliant on its jump scares, and that's always a red flag for me. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the movie was almost refusing to make good use of the aesthetic that they have, the setting that they have. It was almost just actively refusing to use the setting that it had. For these reasons and more, The Forest, my number 2 movie that I expected more from in 2016. Also, I'm just noticing that whenever I put my hands on the table, the camera's shaking, so I'm going to stop doing that. And my number one movie that I expected more from in 2016 is Passengers. Passengers is a sci-fi drama starring Jennifer Lawrence, Chris Pratt, Lawrence Fishburne, and Michael Sheen, and is directed by Morton Tildum. An advanced spacecraft traveling to a distant colony planet and traveling with thousands of passengers has a malfunction in some of its sleeping pods. As a result, 2 passengers are awakened 90 years too early. I love me some sci-fi. Everybody knows that. Anyone that's ever talked movies with me knows that I love me some sci-fi. And dramatic sci-fi, that's really my wheelhouse. That's where like the best Star Trek is in the drama, not necessarily in the action. The best sci-fi for me is this kind of sci-fi, the dramatic sci-fi that focuses on the story and the characters rather than shoot, bang, blast aliens. And when I first heard the concept, basically 2 people stranded in space, nothing they can do about it, having to learn to cope with that situation and coexist together, I was really excited for this. This tries to be that, and it's not a complete failure, but there's a really fatal flaw in this movie that I don't think enough people are talking about. I'm never the first person to play this card, but Passengers is a sexist movie. Whether it means to be sexist or not, I can't imagine that it does. It is. And it's sexist in this way. Jennifer Lawrence's character has absolutely no agency from the second she steps onto that ship. First of all, I don't want to spoil exactly what happens because the marketing campaign for this movie is intentionally misleading, so I don't want to spoil what happens. But Chris Pratt's character makes a decision on behalf of Jennifer Lawrence's character. Let's put it that way. And this decision is not given nearly, for one, it's not given nearly enough time to develop before it happens to really give it the gravitas and the emotional weight and the importance that a decision like this should have had. It's just simply not given enough time in movie to develop. So that decision gets made prior to the reveal of what that decision was. All Jennifer Lawrence's character, the only purpose that it serves is to be Chris Pratt's girlfriend and write her books sometimes. And then after the reveal of what happens, she's angry for like 2 days, and then she saves his life, and all's forgiven. Basically what I'm trying to say is Passengers is Stockholm Syndrome in space. The only way this story works for me is by telling myself that Chris Pratt's character is not a sympathetic character, that he's actually kind of a scumbag. It's the only way that story arc kind of works for me. But then the movie is basically telling you later on that no, this is not the case. Like, he's really redeemable in this way that simply doesn't work and doesn't overshadow the fact that it's just a sexist movie, whether it intends to be or not. This doesn't mean that I hated this movie, but disappointing doesn't even begin to describe how I felt at the end of this movie. I had such high expectations, such high hopes for a movie that's set like this, and to do it the way they did it, I'm sorry, like it just, for me, it didn't work, and Passengers is my number one movie that I expected more from. After that disappointment, let's end the video on a high note. We're now going to do the award for the 3 movies that I expected less from in 2016. My number 3 movie that I expected less from in 2016 is Keanu. Keanu is an action comedy starring the comedy duo of Key and Peele, that's Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele, along with Nia Long and Anna Faris, and is directed by Peter Atencio. In Keanu, 2 cousins, played by Key and Peele, one being recently separated from a relationship, hatch a plot to retrieve a stolen kitten by posing as drug dealers for a street gang. Full disclosure, not a Key and Peele fan. And after I read that synopsis, the movie sounds kind of dumb, doesn't it? I kind of made a relation between this movie and the game of baseball when I did my Criticker review for it, and I just want to read it for you because I actually think it's a pretty good connection and it really accurately sums up the way that I ended up feeling about Keanu. Not every joke connects, and not every gag is funny. but any baseball player will tell you that a bunt single is just as satisfying as any other hit, and over the course of the season, it adds up to a pretty good average. That's what this movie was for me. It was funny enough of the time to work overall as an effective comedy. It's actually got the odd moment in it too that is pretty inspired, either from a comedic standpoint or otherwise. And the main thing about the movie is it's effective and funny and cute, and it's better than kind of cute because of the kitty cat. And that's really all that I expected this movie to be. I expected to watch it and leave and be like, that wasn't very funny, but the cat was cute. So Keanu is my number 3 movie that I expected less from in 2016. My number 2 movie that I expected less from in 2016 is Kubo and the Two Strings. Kubo and the Two Strings is an animated fantasy movie starring the voices of Matthew McConaughey, Charlize Theron, Ralph Fiennes, and Rooney Mara, and is directed by Travis Knight. Kubo lives a quiet life in a seaside village until his life is turned upside down by a spirit from the past, reigniting an age-old vendetta. In order to survive, Kubo must locate a magical suit of armor that was once worn by his late father, a great samurai warrior. You know what? I walked into this movie ready to like it. I'm like, this is going to be a good movie. I'm going to enjoy this. It's got all the things that I really kind of look forward to in these kind of movies. It's got the Japanese aesthetic. There have been some really incredible animated movies in the last couple of years. I walked in ready to really like this. I was not ready to fall in love. Where Kubo and the Two Strings really succeeds is in the fact that it's not just authentic to the setting within the movie, which is, seaside Japan, the Japanese aesthetic. Not that it's just ridiculously authentic and faithful to that, but it's faithful to the history and traditions of true Japanese legends and folk tales. This is it's a folk tale within a folk tale. The movie itself is a folk tale. They pulled that off so incredibly well, not to mention it's aesthetically beautiful. The animation is incredible. It's fluid, really rich story that's told in an incredible way from start to finish. The voice acting is really good. There's nothing not to love about Kubo and the Two Strings. But possibly my favorite part is that there's some heavy stuff that happens in this movie. There's a dead father. There's a mother with PTSD. There's all kinds of interesting things in this movie. And for a kid's movie, it doesn't deaden them. It refuses to cop out on, very serious elements that are in a movie like this. It has an assumedly younger audience because it's an animated movie, but it refuses to deaden those themes for its audience. And that's a real accomplishment in a kid's movie. Kubo and the Two Strings is my number 2 movie that I expected less from in 2016. My number 1 movie that I expected less from in 2016 is Zootopia. It's an animated crime drama starring the voices of Jason Bateman, Idris Elba, Octavia Spencer, and Alan Tudyk, and is directed by the team of Rich Moore, Byron Howard, and Jared Bush. In the animal city of Zootopia, a fast-talking, grifting fox is on the run after being framed for a crime he didn't commit. Zootopia's newest top cop, a self-righteous little bunny rabbit, is hot on his tail, but when they are both the victims of a conspiracy, they're forced to team up. One thing I forgot to mention about Kubo and the Two Strings, just before we continue with Zootopia, and I'm only doing this because they do tie in, eventually when I have children, Kubo and the Two Strings is a DVD that will be in my children's library. I want them to experience this kind of movie when they're, a few years older and old enough to appreciate it. And speaking of a great animated movie that will also be in my children's DVD library, Zootopia. Zootopia is a movie that is ridiculously well-rounded, and that's the way that I described it when I wrote my review for it. It's great for kids. It's great for adults. It works as a date night movie, which I would have never thought in a million years. But Zootopia, it works for that. It's a great solo viewing. It's great for anyone that is in the audience. Add on to that, Jesus, didn't Disney go and do it? They made a kids movie that was an allegory for racism and segregation. It was the dynamics of the city of Zootopia that really took me as probably the most intriguing and the most well-done aspect of this movie, aside from, of course, the animation, which is great, and the voice acting, which is also great. But it was the dynamics of the city that they built that were really intriguing. There are overt allegories to racism and segregation. There are subtle allegories to racism and segregation. And the fact that they put all of this in a kid's movie that then also at the same time works as a kid's movie and isn't boring. Zootopia may be the most subtly and deceptively intelligent movie of 2016. Zootopia, my #1 movie that I expected less from in 2016. All right, folks, we're going to take a break in the awards show now. Come back on the next video when we're going to be talking about my top 5 worst movies of 2016. Just to recap what we did in this one, my winner for I Can't Believe I Loved This Movie was Demolition. My winner for I Can't Believe I Hated This Movie was The Fifth Wave. My 3 winners for I Expected More from these movies were Suicide Squad, The Forest, and Passengers. And my 3 winners for I Expected Less from these movies were Keanu, Kubo and the Two Strings, and Zootopia. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is the 2016 Bridgewater's Finest Movie Awards, and we'll catch you in a minute.